Hey guys, Mac here, and today I want to talk about the new Mastodon from Portugal. This is an interesting time to be in the hobby because a lot of interesting miniatures are coming out around us. However, I have noticed that several tanks and units don't look quite right to me. At first I thought it was just me, but the more I looked, the more I started to notice a lot of people on Facebook and on forums like Bell of Lost Souls uh, was saying not negative feedback, but neutral feedback. People were often saying sentences like, something isn't quite right to me, I don't know, it's just not quite capturing my imagination, um, words to that effect. Now, coming from a design and engineering background, I think I've come up with the solution to the problem. I'd like to share that here today. Now, keep your eye on the picture in the background, as I'll be referencing it later on. To start with, I'd like to share a quote from Richard Taylor. He's the man at Weta Workshop and the department head behind the Lord of the Rings and Hobbit films. The design process for any culture is never random. When we start the process, we try to find the central graphic motif, the design feature that speaks across a whole race of people. What does that mean to us? Well, we're used to seeing a certain culture portrayed a certain way. In Lord of the Rings, you can really easily tell the difference between Rohan elves or orcs and Gondorians. It's basic design, and it's very clear and evident in 40k. When you look at the Eldar and Eldar Grav tanks, for example, compared to Imperial Guard and an Imperial Chimera, they're clearly very different. So, with this in mind, let's look at some Imperial flyers and see if you can pick the design motif and spot what the odd one out is and why it doesn't quite fit. Then I'll explain why in a moment. Let's look at our flyers. We have the Thunderhawk, the Xiphon, the Stormwolf, the Fire Raptor, and lastly, the Kestis. What is off here? What is the central design theme of Imperial flyers, Space Marine ones specifically? Well, all of these aircraft have very large engines. In fact, the engines are often in direct proportion to the size of the hull. Always a single main engine on each side of the hull, with a central extra engine on the Thunderhawk, due to its large super heavy nature. Their cockpits are always low profile, recessed quite heavily into the hull, with the hull running on behind it for the length of the aircraft. On none of these flyers is the cockpit raised up above the flyer and protruding in any way. The Stormwolf, however, breaks that mold. The flyer is different. First off, and most noticeable, is the small paired engine arrangement. There are two very small engines on each side of the aircraft, as opposed to the traditional one large engine on each side. They are also much shorter than what is customary for a flyer. Next, the cockpit is a very large protrusion on top of the craft, and also it's a glass bubble. It isn't recessed into the aircraft like on other flyers, and even the similar Kestis, the cockpit is built into the superstructure and is very much a narrow armoured slit, keeping very much in line with the style on Rhinos and Land Raiders, which themselves have narrow armoured slits on the front of them. The Stormwolf also lacks true wings. These tiny little flappers are useless, and when all the other marine aircraft usually have a large pair of wings, it sticks out to you. The only exception to the rule is the Storm Talon, which was designed in a time when aircraft were still speeders and very much is designed like a land speeder in the cockpit. Lastly, the hull has too many weapons and features mounted to it in proportion to other flyers. The Stormwolf has side sponsons, it has a top-mounted turret, a pair of las cannons on it. The Kestis assault ram is twice the size, and yet only has a small, very discreet missile on each wing. Discreet, as far as space marines go, that is. And a single large melter weapon between the two pontoons. This is why the Stormwolf is a fucking disaster of design. Not because it is poorly made or doesn't reflect the Space Wolves, but because it doesn't reflect established Marine Imperial design. Sure, you can argue that it doesn't need big engines and wings because it's powered by space magic and pixie dust, but that's hardly a comfort to someone looking at it from a hobbyist perspective. Now, let's take a look at Imperial tanks. Imperial tanks in general are very clearly based upon World War I bridge tanks, and by extension the failed World War II tank design, the TOG, a very ugly tank at that. Uh, all Imperial tanks follow this design approach. They're a large, single-tier hull, with tracks of proportional size. Usually a small armoured turret is on top of the vehicle, or an open artillery missile rack, and in some cases a light superstructure with defensive weapons. The tracks are uniform in nature, and are often they have a sponsored weapon mounted in the middle of the side armor plating which is usually very flat surface with small cutouts in it, which usually contain vents. In summary, as follows. Now, recent vehicles like the Taurox have come out, and the design doesn't fit this established layout of Imperial vehicles, which is why it failed to capture so many people's imagination. You see, the design is a large boxy truck, not a monocoque hull. On top of that, it has four very separate and very small track sections, as opposed to one large track section on each side, which is the size and profile of the hull. There are no side sponsons, but you can let that slide. Um, However, the only feature that really applies to an Imperial tank on it is the top turret, which is a small turret and well armoured. Now, let's apply these rules of design to the Mastodon. Well, unfortunately, the Mastodon breaks a lot of these rules. See, the hull is large, but it's not a single tier, it's multi-level. There are clearly two stories to this tank. A main level where the assault ramp and troops are housed, and an upper level which is possibly a bunker of some description or the control house. The sides of the hull are not flat, large surfaces. They're multifaceted and tiered. Now, the sides on a marine vehicle, as I stated earlier, are usually the same size and shape as the tank. However, in this case, they're not. The tracks themselves are divided up into four separate and differently sized pairs of tracks. Again, something is weird about that. You may not have picked up on it, but your brain is telling you that it's not quite right. You're not used to it. Lastly, the top turret is not armed. That little turret on the top there looks really cool, but it doesn't look like a marine turret. Marine turrets are usually a large gun with armoured sheets around it, or they're attached to a very large turret, very well armoured, like on Predator. This turret doesn't look anything like that. I will note that what the Mastodon does get right from a marine perspective is that the side sponsons are built onto the tracks, into the center of the track sides, which is perfect. That's perfect marine design right there. Now, I'm not saying that the Mastodon is a bad vehicle. In fact, quite the opposite. It's a creative design, doing something new and interesting. However, I do feel that the design would have worked better if it had stuck to the style of the Gorgon Super Heavy Transport. For me, the Gorgon ticks the right boxes. The hull is large, a single tier. The sides of the hull are large, flat surfaces. The tracks are single tracks, on each side, roughly the size and shape of the hull. The top of the superstructure is white and has defensive weapons, and the sponsons are built into the flat armor on the track sides. So I think there is the problem. People had a concept in their subconscious of what the Mastodon would be. A larger, more heavily armed and armored Gorgon, most likely. Something unmistakably related to the vehicles around it, possibly even sharing the same chassis as other vehicles around it. Now, thinking back to the start, I mentioned the picture that's running through the background of this video, and I'll now quote Peter Jackson. I want to be able to pick each character out by their silhouette. This is a way that you can easily distinguish who is who at a glance. In this picture, you can clearly tell the different characters apart. For those who are not too familiar with the film, you won't be able to tell who is who, but you will tell that they're different. It's the same with Imperial tanks, and this is what you need to know. When you see an Imperial tank, you can tell what it is from just the outline, the silhouette. You can tell if it's a Marine tank or a Guard tank. The Mastodon is distinct, but it doesn't fit into either camp. It doesn't look like a Marine tank. It doesn't look like an Imperial Guard tank. It's something not quite right. It looks like a bunker fell from the sky and squashed a Spartan and a Sicarian at the same time. This isn't to say I hate the design, because I really don't. I do like it. It's something different. But it doesn't fit the marine aesthetic for me, and it's not sitting well. I applaud the work that went into it. It is not a bad tank. It isn't a terrible money-grubbing new toy for the sake of a new toy. Uh, it's something different to what we've seen before, and not bad different, just something we're not used to. And most importantly of all, it isn't a crime against the hobby like certain other creations from Games Workshop. See you all next video.